My name is Tabitha Hernandez, and this is my workshop presentation on the communication theory of identity. I have often sat back and wondered, who am I? What is the purpose of my life? I'm sure many of you have probably pondered the same type of question or scenario. And many of us can probably think of several self-help gurus like Dr. Phil or Oprah who are more than willing to give us their opinions or their thoughts on the matter, or self-help books like The Purpose-Driven Life or Tuesdays with Maury that kind of give us paths or guidelines to follow. But our identity and who we are is internal. It's internal to us. And I'm not sure any self-help book or any guru can really help solidify that. I think we need to better understand who we are and what goes into making up who we are. A joke comes to mind. An individual walks into a bookstore and says to the customer service representative, "Excuse me, can you tell me where your self-help section is located?" The customer service representative kind of smiles and snarkily replies, "Well, that kind of defeats the purpose, right?" The communication theory of identity, which was developed in the 1980s by Michael Hecht, attempts to identify or to clarify our identity through the process of communication. It seeks to answer the question, how do individuals live out who they are through communication? We know that our identity is threefold. Our identity is our self-perception or our self-concept. It is what we think of ourselves. Second, it is what others think about us or how their behaviors towards us mold how we behave in turn. And third, it is the groups or the society or the culture in which we are a part of and how it molds our identity and how we relate to those around us. Hecht and his associates identified dimensions of identity that went beyond these personal constructs of self, others, and societal, and it really considered how interactions impact and build our identity. The communication theory of identity captures identity not just as self, but as communication and action. Hecht and his associates widened the lens on identity by exploring it as layered, elaborating on the multi-dimensional layers and frames of identity. In doing so, they identified 4 frames or layers of identity. The first of these frames is the personal frame. This is where identity is our self-concept or our self-image. It is what many view as the psychological view. It is our idea about self, and our identity is defined by the meanings and the symbols that we attach to it. For instance, I'm married. I'm a wife. The symbol that I attach to that personal construct is my wedding band. The second frame or layer is the enactment. In this particular frame, the enactment frame centers on identity expressed in social interactions. It is the focus of the messages that express identity. That is to say that not all messages are about identity, but our identity is expressed in all of the messages that we transpose. The third frame is the relational frame. This is one in which identity is the property of the relationships that we are a part of because our identity is enacted in these relationships. For instance, I'm a wife, I'm a mother. Those are my relational frames. The relationship I have with my husband, the relationship I have with my daughter, and how I enact in those relationships defines my identity as a wife and a mother. The relational frame goes beyond that and focuses on identity as being mutually constructed. In my example as a wife or a mother, there are certain roles or things that go along with being a wife and a mother, and those are mutually constructed between my husband and I and my daughter and I. It is our self-portrait in those relationships. And this type of frame can be explored by looking at those around us as well as the relationships that we are involved in. That brings me to the next layer and the final layer, which is the communal layer of identity. And within this frame, identity is explored looking at the groups and the roles that we hold in those groups. It focuses as well as on how groups define identity. So whether you're involved in a running group or a parent-teacher association or a Bible study, and your roles within those groups, you hold that particular role as part of your identity, as part of who you are. All of these frames are interacted and they intertwine, interpenetrate with one another. They're often very complex and they're constantly evolving, and therefore the nature of our identity is constantly evolving with them. Our identity holds aspects close to the relationships that we're in. It has labels attached to it. There are symbols attached to it. There are levels of importance attached to our identity. And that is why all of this communication theory of identity is important to all of us. It's important to us, the so what factor is that our identity is personal, it is dyadic, and it is communal. And it's important to understand that when we are interacting with other people. When we are trying to identify with others or vice versa, it's important to understand that all of our frames of identity overlap with one another and they're complex. Sometimes these roles might even contradict one another. One example I can think of is you're a conservative Christian. And yet at the same time, when you're looking at politicians, when it's time to vote, you might have, there might be a little bit of gray area or a little bit more, I don't want to say liberal thinking, but you might think a little differently based on a politician's point of view. And so sometimes those might contradict. Another thing to keep in mind is that our identities are fluid. They're always changing in multiple ways. There are a various number of ways to let out our identity. Our identity is negotiated. It is subject to change. This can happen as a result of communication, or it can happen during communication. Another thing to keep in mind is that our identity is not just personal and dyadic and communal, but it is also emotional, it is cognitive, it is behavioral. Actions speak louder than words. So our identity is not just what we say or how we communicate, but it's also how we behave with our communication and in response to other people's communication. Our identity can vary in scope. It can vary in level of importance. It can vary from situation to situation, from relationship to relationship. Understanding the communication theory of identity and what goes into building our identity will help us to understand other groups and how they create and define identity. It'll help us understand other people's behaviors and other people's thoughts or opinions. It'll help us better understand other cultures and the way that they might do things and their beliefs. It will show us also how to treat other people. For instance, if I show up to work in a business suit, I expect it to be treated in a professional manner. And finally, it'll show us the different ways that we can enact our identity. I am not the same way with my husband as a wife as I am with my daughter as a mother. But I am still me. I am still the same person. But I think better understanding our identity and who we are and how our communication boils into who we are will help us better understand other people when we're interacting with them, other cultures when we're interacting with other cultures, interracially, interethnically, other religions, when we are talking to others about Christ. I think that it's important to understand that all of these different layers work together to build who we are and drive our purpose in life. I hope that you've enjoyed my presentation, and I wish you all the best for the rest of the term.